Well, good morning, everybody. What a high energy opening! Holy cow! If I didn't have an extra cup of coffee, that'll do it for you. But first of all, let me welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name's Mike Dietrich. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at Cvent. And as an event tech company, it's probably no surprise that we are big believers in the effectiveness of events and where they're going. They are a huge part of our marketing mix here at Cvent. I think over in any given year, about 20% of our annual lead flow and about 25% of our marketing program budget actually goes to our event channel. So it's probably no surprise that we put a lot of focus and attention on where this space is headed and how we maximize that value. And so that's a lot about what we're going to talk about today. A couple quick housekeeping items before we get going. First, really hope this is going to be interactive. So please submit your questions in the Q&A on the right side of the attendee hub there, and we'll answer them there. And also, same thing with chat. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have you here and interact with your colleagues. And so that chat is also right there on the right side of the attendee hub. And we certainly encourage you to use that, and we'll be responding in there as well. The perennial favorite question of every webinar, can we get the slides? Can we get the slide deck? Of course. So just download the slide deck. Please click on the details link at the bottom right of the attendee hub. And then right there in the full session details link, you'll be able to find the presentation today. So as we get going, let me kind of set up how we're going to spend the next 40 minutes or so together. Got about 40 minutes of prepared remarks, and then my favorite part of this is always hearing your questions. And so I do hope that you'll get those questions coming early and often. But we wanted to structure today because if you're like us, at this time of year, many of us are deep in the process of what is our event roadmap going to look like next year? We're budgeting, we're planning. And so we're going to start today with some data that shows what event programs are looking like in 2023. So that's where we're going to start. And a quick heads up, we want to hear from you. We're going to involve you today. So you may already be seeing a poll question. We'd love to hear how your programs are shaping up. I'm sure your colleagues joining today would want to hear that as well. But then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why the programs are looking that way. And so we're going to spend some time looking at specifically some interesting opportunities that are resulting as people are putting their event programs together in these fashions next year. So we're going to spend a little time after we talk about what's happening, why is it being constructed that way? And finally, look, you're investing an hour of your day with us today. So we want to make sure you leave today's webinar with some practical and useful examples that you can actually start employing with your teams. And so we'll spend the last part of our time together with some thoughts on how you and your teams can actually start taking advantage of some of the opportunities that people are seeing as they're building their event programs for scale and for additional engagement and interactivity next year. So let's start with that first, just kind of shake everybody awake if those opening videos didn't do it. Before we get into what the data is saying, what does your event program look like in 2023? How are you all thinking about your in-person events, what might be done virtually, and how might virtual continue to play a role in some of your event programs, how you might be mixing those together, what roles you might think hybrid is playing in that equation. So again, before we look at what some of the external and even Cvent data is saying, I'd love to hear from you all and see what you're saying. So let's look at this. Let's take a quick look at this. All in person this time, about 27%, okay? Mostly in person with a bit of virtual, about 50% there. Mostly virtual with a few in-person events, another 11% or so, and staying all virtual, about 4%. Okay, very interesting. I think as we look at the data coming up here, you all are gonna recognize numbers very similar to that. So let's see. So first of all, thank you all for sharing that. Let's take a look at a few different data sources to see how the event programs next year are shaping up. So first, I want to start with some interesting research that Forrester research did recently. And just like your answers, you're starting to see that multi-format picture emerge pretty clearly. Interestingly enough, when they did this, 63% of their respondents to this Forrester survey plan to conduct the same number or more of virtual events in the next 12 months. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, about how virtual is starting to be deployed, but it's certainly not going away according to what Forrester had found. But I think similar to what you all just shared, a large majority, 74% in this study, were planning in-person events in 2022, and then they're seeing the same patterns in 2023. So this rush to get back to kind of that strong desire to go back to the deep in-person engagement that was with us all before the pandemic shut us down. And then I think, interestingly enough, here another 58% agreed that their flagship B2B events, where they're deeply investing dollars anyway, that they were looking to explore hybrid there, kind of probably to maximize that depth of engagement and that reach. And I know that much of us in the industry are still trying to figure out exactly where hybrid may sit in our plans next year. Based on this output, starting to settle into that perhaps tier one flagship part of a B2B event program. But let's take a look at a couple other data points. First, let me orient you to this slide very quickly. On the left, I want to share some CVent data. We've got a very large global community of use. We survey that community every year. And this year we asked them, how are they looking at their event program next year? And 72% of those events were going to be in person. Another, let's call it 14%, were going to be virtual. In this case, virtual event, pure virtual event, or a webinar. And then hybrid made up about another 15% of what our installed customer base told us they were planning in 2023. I will share with you all that 72% in-person number is up just a bit from what we actually saw in our systems in 2022. So in 2023, a little bit more focus on in-person events from what we're hearing from our installed base, over and above what we actually saw in our systems in 2023. And interestingly enough, the 14% that comprises virtual here is actually down slightly a little bit from what we saw in our actual systems in 2022. So that's what the CVent data footprint said. On the far right of this slide was just some really interesting information I found from the Amex Global Meetings and Events Forecast. And what I thought was interesting here was starting to get a sense of the geographic and regional breakdown in event programs. And you can see here that it does change a bit depending on whether you're in North America or out in Asia Pacific. But I still think predominantly what you see here is a healthy mix of in-person events, virtual events, hybrid events, all coming back pretty strongly, and it's still in pretty robust parts of the event programs that will exist in 2023. So let's kind of pull back from the data for a second. And before we kind of tie this up in a bow and then get to why, I did want to spend a final second on virtual, because I think regardless of the data set that we just looked at, virtual is having some staying power. I pulled this just because I was very interested in how overall Google searches for virtual events have changed from 2019 all the way to the end of October of this year. And so that's what you see here. Certainly it's down from its artificial highs of the pandemic, but it's still well above virtual events, is what this Google search is, still well above 2019 interest levels. I think that's telling all of us that there are still some very powerful drivers for virtual that remain next year. The ability to extend reach, certainly budget realities are probably playing a role here, even forces that are driving sustainability, accessibility, and maybe just 2 years spent in nothing but virtual experiences have really changed the expectations of the audience. They want to continue to engage with us online and virtually. So there still seems to be a heavy emphasis on virtual as a contained part of an overall approach next year. So what does this all mean? Like collectively, when we look at all this, how does this mean that 2023 programs are shaping up? Well, after 2 years of maybe have to, it seems like we're settling into a more thoughtful and a more purposeful event mix next year, where our in-person events, you saw it in the 74%, or even how you all responded today, our in-person events are going to be our anchors. That deep engagement, right? There's still no replacement for that face-to-face. But then we're going to start, looks like everybody is starting to use those online events as the connective tissue, a purposeful, thoughtful connective tissue between those substantial, deep in-person experiences. We hear a lot that that organizations are going to repurpose a lot of that content from their anchor in-person events, make derivative content, getting those in front of larger virtual audiences, either at virtual events or webinars. And they're doing that to keep that engagement up, keep that ongoing engagement happening with those online audiences, and actually, in many cases, deploying these virtual and webinar programs and events as a way to prime that audience for their next substantial in-person event. So just some interesting data, some interesting thoughts as we look across our global community of use and the industry report, and even your responses here today, a little bit about how 2023 is shaping up. Now, the second piece that we wanted to talk about today is the why behind the what. What is happening out there is certainly very interesting, maybe reinforcing and revalidating some of what we're looking at and we always thought was happening in 2023. But I wanted to now go into a little bit of the why behind the what. Why are organizations starting to build their programs this way? And maybe we take a step back here because we throw around this word as we describe the event channel next year. We throw around digital quite a bit. Events are becoming more digital. The channel is becoming more digital. We talk about how events as a whole have become more digitized. And I think it might be worth taking a quick step back of what do we mean by that and why does it matter and how does it inform why organizations are putting their programs together as they are in 2023. And to do this, I want to take a step back. And for you marketers like me that are joining us today, might be worth going back and looking at why digital and digital channels and digital experiences have always kind of been marketers' best friend. And I think it boils down to three things. We love our digital channels because they have very broad reach. They enable us to access large number of audiences, right, relatively easily. So that's always been a feature of virtual that has really appealed to many marketing organizations, marketing functions, is that broad reach. The second one is these digital channels are always on. Our experiences and the content that we can make available at any time at the convenience of our prospects or customers. So whenever they're ready to engage, we have value-added programming and content that's available to engage them. And so there was this always-on nature of digital that was always something that marketers very much appreciated. And then the third thing that digital always brought to the party was it was highly measurable. And so organizations, marketing organizations, C-suite always really appreciated that, right? This was a highly measurable channel if it was digital. You knew what was working. You knew what wasn't. You could constantly optimize it. And you could really prove the ROI from the investment in those things that were digital. And so when we apply this to how our 2023 programs are looking like, I think we start to see some really interesting results in this. When Forrester looked at this, again, why are we doing this way? What benefits do you hope to see from the way you're constructing your event program in 2023? You start to see a lot of the same aspects of why organizations love digital in the first place. So when we look at some of these respondent answers, they show the extent to which these broader digital benefits are now associated with events and with the event channel, right? Event channel that traditionally many have thought was offline. But as we go forward, 76% say they're putting these programs together this way because of increased reach and attendance. Going back to that reach and attendance benefit, it's always been part of digital. Another 57% said better ability to collect data about attendee interests and content consumption. So there's that measurability element that, again, had always been the province of our digital channels. Now, but you know what? My events are starting to behave this way. I can measure them with much greater granularity than I have before. And then another 57% here, the ability to extend that event duration beyond its original broadcast dates. So again, going back to this notion of we love digital because of its always on engagement. We can engage customers and prospects at a time and in a medium convenient to them. I just thought it was very interesting to start to see these digital benefits now really starting to sink into the bones of planners and marketers, and they're putting together their event programs purposefully to get those benefits. Let me kind of unpack each one of those just for a second, just to kind of drive this home. So I want to take a look at how these event formats are being stitched together to deliver that broader reach that is the benefit that most of these folks are seeking. So leveraging these online options, right, to initiate broader engagement. So forget about the anchor event. That in-person event that's on this slide is represented by that green box in the center. That's your in-person event. Starting to surround that deep in-person anchor with online options. Those are probably going to help these organizations access new names, new accounts, maybe bring higher level contacts into their database. Getting these new audiences aware, getting them engaged, and again, getting them primed for that substantial in-person event. And then as a way to keep that conversation, keep that community going even after that in-person event has ended, and being able to do this all under your brand. And these digital extensions can be done at a comparatively relatively low cost. So just wanted to tease out this notion of purposely putting together online and in-person events together, not only to extend the reach and engagement, get them primed for the in-person event, but then also being able to take advantage and continue that conversation under your brand after that event is over. But there's another component of digitization at work here. Remember the benefit around the ability to extend the event duration beyond its traditional start and stop dates? Well, I want to zoom in on that because what you're seeing here is this ability to now extend event engagement. So let's take a traditional in-person event that has its start dates and its stop dates. Well, what I think many organizations are seeing now is that 2 years spent in virtual events have had a lasting impact even on the in-person event space and the in-person journey, right? Engagement now begins at the moment the attendee signs up. So the days and the weeks and the months leading up to your in-person event are actually starting to look a lot more like your virtual event. So there's a whole new opportunity to start to connect your attendees with content and each other and with sponsors before that event even started. Through networking, through video discussions, through live streams, after the event, through post-event on demand. All of these digital elements are now starting to come into play in the context of an in-person event, helping extend the amount of time we spend engaging with any single attendee. So again, just those, I thought it might be worth pulling out. Not only are online events complementing in person, but even that in-person event is becoming more digital and is extending out pre and post to drive additional engagement, additional interactions, more possible insights and interests that we're getting from our attendees for the same resources we've invested in that in-person event. Okay, so we've gone through what the event programs are shaping up to look like in 2023, and we've teased out a little bit of why they may be looking that way. For the last part of what I wanted to talk about here for the next 10 minutes or so, I want to talk about some potential ways to get started. Going back to the beginning, make sure that all of you leave today with some practical and some useful ways that if you wanted to start taking advantage of some of these elements of pre and post event engagement, what does that look like? How might you get started with that? So let's start with some thoughts on pre-event, on how that pre-event experience might start to look a little different with these new thoughts and of extended engagement in mind. And I actually came across a really interesting statistic from Cisco that and this may surprise nobody, but I thought it was very interesting that in 2022, according to Cisco, 82% of internet traffic was video. This explosion of video. And so what might it look like if you leverage this proliferation of video to begin engagement well before your event even started, right? Rethinking, indeed, when your event starts, not at check-in, but immediately after registration. How might you use video to be able to start to connect and engage a registrant in the weeks before they even show up at your in-person event? You might consider building speaker and session hype with teasers and webisodes inside a digital portal before that event started. You can leverage those insights, understanding from the measurability you're getting, understanding what people are starting to express interest in and recommend additional content to them before, again, they even get on site. AI can help with this. We're actually starting to see customers publishing their event well before the start date, starting to drive video engagement in that hub and suggesting other content to attendees based on their pre-event consumption patterns. I'll share with you that Cvent has our big annual user conference. It's called Cvent Connect. We opened Cvent Connect. We opened a digital element of Cvent Connect up weeks before the in-person event started. And 40% of our total engagement points, measurable engagement points, happened before anybody ever got on site with us for that event. So there can be power in starting to develop and put in front of your registrants video and digital content before folks even get on site. Another great use case, maybe a simple one here, is many of us are accustomed to sending out those reminder emails, those know before you go emails that grounds our attendees and what they can expect. Starting to see organizations do that in video. Highly engaging, gives them a deep sense of the experience they're going to have on site. They're starting to promote that and put that in these digital portals well before the event even starts. Builds hype, builds engagement, and really helps drive up attendance rates. Because we love our registrants, but the ultimate goal is to actually make sure that those registrants show up on site. So some really creative use of video pre-event to do that. Let's take another look at another possible pre-event use case, though, again, around how that new digitized in-person experience can be leveraged to drive value to our attendees before they show up. And this is about pulling that sense of community forward, right? What might it look like if we're incorporating digital community building tools well before that event even started? The convenience to go into that portal and schedule appointments ahead of time, to be able to preview in a very high fidelity way the exhibitors and the sponsors that may be at that event. Attendees can start to see what sponsors and exhibitors are going to be there, look at their videos, look at their collateral, build that short list. and maybe even begin addressing some of those sponsors and exhibitors with direct messaging within that pre-event portal. So they can start to build those relationships, make those attendees much more productive on site, and give some of your exhibitors and sponsors a little pre-event engagement. We've even seen, and we did this at our event, we've seen other organizations do this, think about hosting in this digital format, birds of a feather meetups before the event starts. This is particularly valuable perhaps for your first timers, folks that have not been to your event before. So they're coming, they're starting to network with their peers and already building connections and community of interests that they've got in place long before they even set foot at your event. So just a couple practical possibilities to leverage some of these in-person digital elements before the in-person event even starts. Let's take a look about post-event for a second. That same explosion of video, that 82% of traffic was video traffic. That same trend we're seeing very highly adopted in post-event engagement techniques. I mentioned a few minutes ago that at our event at Cvent Connect, 40% of our engagement points happened before check-in. Another 15% happened after our last attendee got on a plane and went home. So 15% of that engagement for that event, for our event, was post-event engagement. And we see this quite a bit from our community of use. And we see that primarily done through extending the life of the content outside of the four walls of the event and making sure that that is available on demand. Many of us joining today may do that. If you're not, I really encourage you to do that. It's low-hanging fruit to leverage all the work that you did to create all that wonderful content and making sure it still works hard for you after the event is over. And this post-event content experience is actually really where some of your event marketing can merge with your larger digital marketing strategy. You can start to think about even delivering non-event videos and content and offers alongside that event content to really give your attendees the ability to take not only the sessions that you made available on demand, but to start explore adjacent content that they may also find valuable because they went to a session on a similar topic. So that is what we're starting to see in terms of not only the on-demand offerings from the session content, but how else might you start engaging attendees with your content, even outside of maybe just your session content. And it's a perfect example of how planning teams and marketing teams are starting to really work together to take that captive audience and make sure that they're giving them high value content. We've even started to see organizations that are using this post-event digital experience to start marketing and priming the audience for the next event that they'd like them to attend. Because what better audience for your next event than the one that's already at your existing event? Not only video, but continuing that discussion, continuing to foster that community post-event, right? So all of that great work that you brought those folks together, the relationships they made, the connections they made all under your brand, that doesn't need to stop after the event is over either. Starting to see a lot of organizations having that community persist long after the event is even is closed, through letting them continue direct messaging, having post-event communities of use and discussion groups that are happening. So even that notion of community extends beyond the event end dates. And again, all under your brand. So just some concrete ways that people are starting to put digital to work for them to extend engagement pre and post, and to deliver our attendees much more value pre and post. So just to kind of draw that out, finally, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but I just wanted to just challenge folks about how they might think about their event experience differently if you knew your audience was willing and indeed wanting to enhance that journey end to end with digital elements, right? Opening up that event digitally well before it starts. that call to action to continue that, download that mobile event app right before the event starts, starting to get that engagement in the palm of your hand, the palm of your attendees' hands. After the event is over, those on-demand content, that keeping that community going, establishing and continuing the conversations with your video offerings. Again, could be session content, could be additional offerings that your marketing department or even you as event organizers might want to put in front of them. All of that is possible if you look and rethink the digital elements of your event, extending it pre and post. Okay, got a few more minutes of prepared content and then really looking forward to your questions. But I wanted to close with some final thoughts on measurement. Because a few minutes ago, we talked about those 3 elements of digital, and that as people are starting to put together their 2023 programs, they're purposely making them more digital, and they're purposely doing that because they're trying to get 3 benefits out of it. They're trying to get broader reach, they're trying to extend engagement, and they're trying to do a better job of measuring what this all means. And so my final thought here is around that concept of measurability. And I don't think it's any surprise to those of you joining today that the 2023 environment that we're walking into is still kind of uncertain. We've got exploding event costs. Our in-person events are costing more. We've got all of us have tighter budgets. I was actually talking to a lead planner for a Fortune 500 company recently, and one of the things they were talking to their executive team was about, they actually use this word, what type of event program can I even afford next year? And so this cost, budgets, this is really on people's minds, and all of this points to increased importance of measurability and increased importance of ROI. I think all of us are going to be in a position next year where we are going to have to prove the impact of this channel because of rising costs and because of tight budgets. But luckily, some of those same digitization trends that we've talked about for the last few minutes can work really well to help us on the measurability section here. Because everything that we've talked about today, whether it's your online events, or whether it's the ability to extend the virtual or online footprint of even an in-person event, all that's measurable. All of those digital interactions are measurable, right? We can capture those clicks, we can capture those views, we can capture those downloads, we can capture those registration paths, we can capture all of it. To the extent that it exists digitally, it really is something that as marketers and as event organizers, we've probably been accustomed to capturing that data anyway. So as the channel itself and as events themselves become more digital, they become more measurable. And that is a very powerful tool for those of us that are going to need to prove ROI and prove impact, to make sure we're taking advantage of that data and using it to communicate that value back, right? Not just at any one event, but across all the events that we offer. So there is one more way. I want to reach out and shake everybody again, because I love your thoughts on a poll. I've got one more slide after this that is the results of some other interesting research about how are we doing about all this data? Are we capturing it? Is it delivering value for us? So I would love to get your thoughts on, I'd love to know if you guys are regularly capturing attendee and account activity data from your events. Are you measuring those clicks? Are you measuring those downloads? Are you measuring those views? As the channel is getting more digital, are you able to capture that data? Are you able to use that then to prove value back out to your stakeholders? So I'm very curious to see how you all are thinking about this problem. Let's see. Absolutely, about 30%. Yep, just getting started is the primary response. Not yet. Yep. What's it? Love it. Thank you. You guys made my day. I'm glad nobody answered what is attendee and account data. We're off to a good start. Okay. Thank you very much for that. Let me let me tell you what the survey said. Forrester did the same in that same Forrester survey. They asked their population the same thing, and some good news, bad news here probably. Your colleagues said that 75% of your colleagues said that, yeah, the ability to really collect that data is essential and important. So there seems to be broad agreement that being able to mine our programs for this is super important. I guess the not so good news here is that just over half are actually successfully closing that loop, right? They're actually taking all that data and getting it downstream to their go-to-market teams, right? Their marketing organizations, their sales organizations, in a way that those organizations can make sense of and drive value from. So only about 55% are going that last mile. So I think if there was any thought that I would leave you with today before we take your questions, is that fundamentally, as this whole channel is becoming more digitized next year, and you all, like many others, are purposefully organizing a more digitized channel next year, it just means you've got a lot more data at your fingertips. You got new ways to measure impact there. And so if I could leave you with a closing thought is please capture that data, but don't let it just sit in your desk drawer. Get that data scored, get it rationalized, and close that loop and get it down to your go-to-market teams so they can make sense of it, drive value from it, and that you're being able then to use that data to go back to your executive teams and be able to talk to them about, here's the value that was actually delivered from our event investment this year. Okay. First of all, thank you very much for listening. I can't wait to get to your questions. A couple quick things before we get to your questions, just a few final housekeeping items. I would really appreciate your feedback. So at the end of today, I'd love to get your sense on if we could ask for just a couple seconds of your time on a survey. Was this useful for you? Was this helpful for you? We're always trying to improve our content, always trying to make sure that what we're delivering out to you all is useful and practical and thoughtful. So we'd love to get your feedback. Did we accomplish that today? And then the last thing I'd leave you with is we talked a little bit about continuing to foster the community. We'd love to continue to foster this. So we hope that you'll join us on the 14th of December for an upcoming webinar, Everything You Need to Successfully Run Your In-Person Events. 74 to 75% of you said, yep, doing that next year. And I think this is going to be really interesting and hopefully very valuable content for you if you have time to join us on the 14th. We'd love to have you join. Okay, so with that, I'd love to take your questions. So if you can share those through the Attendee Hub, that would be great. And I will look to see what we've got here, and I will start answering them. Let's see, the first question. First of all, thank you very much for your questions. How do you measure success from in-person events versus virtual events? Can you please give any tips that will help me prove ROI for in-person events to my higher-ups? Great question. Let me take these in two-part. The two-part question, let me answer them each in turn. How do you measure success from in-person events versus virtual events? First, many of the organizations we deal with, they start to look at a little different metric on their virtual events. Virtual events can drive revenue. They are very good at driving large attendance numbers. We're starting to see more organizations actually communicate back the success of their virtual event by, here's how many new accounts we got in front of because we made our event available virtually. Here's how many new names we added to our database because we were able to reach people we didn't have before. Even within existing accounts that they may know, often people are able to reach higher level titles within those organizations because that event was virtual and it happened to fit the convenience and the schedule of a very senior title in that organization that might not have had the ability to come to your in-person event. So I think fundamentally the goals of virtual and in-person, we continue to see revenue, we continue to see attendee satisfaction, we continue to see attendee engagement as kind of the core three that are measurable and we report back to our C-level. But we are starting to see some separation in, hey, don't judge virtual on the same playing field exactly as you would in person, because virtual may be better at attracting a larger but initially less qualified audience. So we're starting to see those reach goals impact that. Can you please give any tips that will help me prove ROI for in-person events to my higher-ups? Yes. The first thing that I think you all should do, if you're not doing it already, is get that data into your CRMs, your marketing systems of record. Because here's what often happens. The executive that wrote the check for the event hears back two things. We had this many people show up and we had 80% satisfaction. And those are great. And we should never lose those core metrics. But often the ability to communicate back the financial commercial impact of the event and the ability to have realized ROI from that event depends first and foremost on getting that engagement data down into the systems of record that your sales and marketing and commercial teams can then take, follow up on, and then the conversation with the C-suite is different. Then it's, this event caused us to accelerate 14 deals worth this much dollars, attributing this much pipeline and this much revenue. And that tends to be the where the person that wrote the check kind of sits up and takes interest. Second, thanks for your questions, by the way. Please keep them coming. Can you speak to honing in on qualified scans in booth versus scans for socks in an efficiently time? Interesting questions. I mean, if I'm reading this right, this is, all right, we got people coming by our booths. How do I understand who's really qualified? A couple things, a couple thoughts here. The first is, I'll use kind of lead scanning software, but its qualification has to happen. It has to happen at point of scan. And so if you're not using a consistent lead capture tool at the events you attend, I'd encourage you to look at that, because what that allows you to do is to pre-populate all that with custom qualification questions that helps you filter out the jokers, somebody that just came by for the swag versus somebody that had a deep conversation with. You're having your booth staff instantly qualifying them through a series of quick, easy questions and getting that qualification material quickly back to your downstream teams. There's a second piece that I would encourage you to do if you're not already doing this at some of the booths that you host, maybe at an event that you host. And that is something we do at Cvent Connect. But we have a trade show. We have an innovation pavilion at the event we host. People come by and they explore our product offerings. We have RFID on those. And that helps us understand linger time. How long did somebody spend at that booth? And so now you have the qualification questions that the person that spoke with them actually completed, but you also have this concept of this person spent 12 minutes at the booth. And so it helps qualify them a little bit more from that aspect too. So just some interesting data points there. Okay, let's see. Number 3. Okay, this was an anonymous question here. How are organizations determining what events to do in person and which ones are virtual? I wish I had the golden answer. I think people are still experimenting. Here's what tends to be falling out. First, if it goes back ultimately to goals. I think organizations are starting to take a more purposeful view that, okay, if what I'm really trying to accomplish with this event is information sharing, broadcast, I may consider doing that virtually. If my event experience is going to require more hands-on training, maybe it's a VIP event that I'm trying to get high-level people that are almost customers and accelerate our funnel. If networking, training, if those elements are really what the goal and the KPI of the event is about, we're starting to see those as okay. Let's assume this is an in-person event to accomplish that desired outcome. So that's how things are starting to shape up a little bit at the broadest level. Cost and organizations that are thinking very deeply in sustainability is very important to them. Their ESG programs are very important to them. They may also start looking at a little bit more skewing on those online events because they want to make sure that their whole event program has some very powerful ESG. They're thinking through their ESG and sustainability elements, and they're cognizant of budget. Okay. Fourth question. Carol, thank you for your question. What is the percentage of registered attendees who engage pre-event on average? Carol, I don't have that stat at my fingertips, but we've got your name. I'd love to follow up. I will tell you, based on the experience that we had at our CVent Connect event, 40% of the, right, we're going to geek out here for a second on some numbers. That was a 3-day event. It was a 3-day hybrid event. So we had about 3,000 people on site with us in Vegas, and we had under 20,000 online, just to give you a scope of that event, Carol. And throughout those 3 days, we captured, using a lot of the technology that we talked about today, we captured 880,000 engagement points across our in-person and our virtual audience. 40% of that 880,000 happened pre-event. 15% of that 880,000 engagement point happened post-event. And so while I know, Carol, that doesn't answer your question specifically because it's not percent of registrants, it gives you at least some feel for that. I will say that pre-event is a pretty data-rich part of the event anyway. People are in there, they're scheduling appointments, they're building their agendas, they are starting to look at some of the teaser videos that we can put in there for them. So it's that pre-event time period was a pretty data-rich experience for us. And so that's probably why you see that 40 at the beginning and 15 post-event. Okay, fifth question, another anonymous one. That's okay. We still love our anonymous questions. You touched on hybrid events. We're exploring hybrid, but are concerned about cost. Completely hear you. Did the research suggest any insights on what events may be hybrid? Yeah. I'll go back to the Forrester research, and I'll also share our experience here at CVent and what we're starting to see in our broader community of use. A lot of interest around hybrid for that flagship B2B user conference, where you're investing your resources anyway. Your budget is probably larger for that anchor event. You're developing a tremendous amount of anchor content for that. And so what we're starting to see is, okay, we've got a lot of investment that's happening here, a lot of dollars, a lot of staff time, a lot of content creation time. We want to get that. We want to in front of the broadest audience we can. And so we're seeing organizations not go to the brain damage of making every element of the in-person event available virtually, but being thoughtful and purposeful about our CEO keynote, we're going to stream that. Our product roadmaps, we're going to stream that. Our core thought leadership and branded content, we're going to make sure that's available to our virtual audience. But some of the other content, we're just going to record that, make it available on demand. So I guess my key point there is hybrid does start to settle at that kind of flagship tier, but it doesn't have to be a budget buster. It can be, if you're thoughtful about what elements of your programming you want to extend to your virtual audiences, you can take advantage of all that great reach that's there without crushing your team or crushing your budget. Okay. Last question. With the increased focus on privacy, Google, et cetera, and hence the demise of 3P cookies, yep, we're focused on ethically gathering quality email addresses and contact info. What is Cvent advising customers to do regarding this digital shift? Got to take privacy and security very serious. So first, I hope your T's and C's for your registrations spell all that out, right? About being very upfront and candid with your registrants about how you're using this. But I think that as digital third-party cookies, as that landscape starts to shift, the ability to get all this data and insights from your events actually becomes more important, because that information is freely given per your terms in your registrations. It's also then expressed interest that's freely given as the attendee makes their way through your event, right? The sessions they register for, the sessions they attend, the feedback they give. These become very powerful interest signals. We can call them buying signals, but they're very powerful signals of expressed interest that are given freely or in concert with the terms of use that you merchandised around your event. And so I think as third-party cookies and those things become an even more difficult minefield, maybe for many of us to navigate, our events can be very powerful, ethical, and forthright ways to capture high quality data around demographics, firmographics, and expressed interest. Okay, I know we're coming to the top of the hour. I want to thank you. I know you all are very busy people. I know this is a very busy time of year for many of you, for all of you. So I really appreciate you spending an hour of that with us today. Wishing all of you a happy holiday, and hopefully we will see you again soon. Thanks, everybody.